You're listening to Where You Live with Gene and Tony.
Welcome back. This is Where You Live with Gene and Tony. Broadcasting live from the Natural Green Lawn and Landscape Studios and brought to you by Extreme Exteriors and American Family Insurance, the Kim Bennett Agency. Well, let's turn our attention now to legislation that is being proposed here in the great state of Minnesota, right where we live. And last week, folks, if you listened to the show, we touched on a article from the Star Tribune that was stating that there are some legislators in Minnesota who were concerned on what was called dual tracking. And dual tracking, simply put, is a person is unable to continue to make payments with their home that they've purchased
on their mortgage
and their agreement with their lender. And so they approach the lender to see if they can work something out.
To modify?
A modification, yes. And while they are trying to do that and providing information to the lender, of course, is beginning the foreclosure proceedings on sort of a dual track.
So they call that dual tracking. On the one hand, they're working with you to modify your loan, supposedly. On the other hand, their legal department's still going forward with foreclosure.
And the idea is that all of a sudden they get to a point where they make a decision and they say, wait, this is what's going to be better in this case than the other. And people are saying, hey, let's, I think it's an unfair process.
Not fair. Yeah.
And that may be. But there's a lot of legislation. I think there's no fewer than, if I'm not mistaken, at least 12 bills. At least 12 bills dealing with foreclosure
that are coming up the legislature
yes.
this session.
And the important thing to remember is in that Star Tribune article, even the writer begins that particular article by saying the worst of the foreclosure crisis is winding down. But
That's
Minnesota legislators are looking at ways to help struggling homeowners who still have a chance to stay in their homes. And so
the dual tracking is the issue they cite in this article. But even at the end of the article, they say banking representatives say dual tracking is no longer a common practice.
So here's what we have. Dual tracking is what is used to incite and get the mob excited.
Right.
Because they say, isn't that unfair? Mm-hmm. And people would say, oh, yeah, that's unfair.
Right.
But what is it that they really want to do? It says they want to help people stay in their homes. That is what they want to really accomplish.
I see.
And that's what they would accomplish if this legislation passes. And folks, if you are indeed a person who believes in rights and responsibilities, you're a person who believes in fairness with other folks. If you live in a homeowner association, you are not going to want to see House File number 85.
We're speaking of one of the 1 dozen bills.
Yeah, we're just going to talk
only
about
seen
one
one.
of them.
That's right.
And let's deal with what some of those issues are.
So House File number 85 is being introduced, right?
Yes.
And it's supposedly tackling the horror of the foreclosure crisis to help more homeowners keep their homes.
Yes, and let's see.
Is that right?
Yes, let's see what it is they want
to accomplish. How are they going to do that?
Yeah. That's right. Let's begin with, and there's so many different sections here that we can touch on, but there is one section I'd like you to begin maybe the discussion with, and that's on limitation on lease and notice to tenants.
Yes, we should mention that this proposed legislation not only deals with owners in foreclosure, it deals with landlords and tenants who may be involved in a property
with the
being
renters
foreclosed.
who are in a home that may be going through foreclosure.
So this legislation says once a landlord has received a notice of a contract for deed cancellation or a notice of mortgage foreclosure sale, the landlord may only enter into a periodic lease agreement with a term of not more than 2 months or the time remaining in the cancellation of the contract, whichever is less. All right? So in a mortgage foreclosure, that would mean probably the 6-month redemption period, correct? So a landlord could enter into a new lease with a term not more than 2 months or the remaining length of the redemption period, whichever is less. Okay? So 2 months is usually less than the redemption period. Am I right?
Yes.
So they're really limiting a lease agreement to 2 months. Right now, the standing legislation, which is set to sunset at the end of 2014, allows a landlord to enter into up to a 1-year lease agreement anytime before the sheriff's sale. So even if that lease goes beyond the redemption period, everyone has to honor it, including the bank. And
that makes sense because we're talking about that's before any time where there's any kind of flag or any kind of problems or issues. Up till that point, someone's made their payment, and a person who owns...
well, no. Sometimes the landlord hasn't made their payments, and they're expecting foreclosure to happen, but it's before the sheriff's sale, so they still enter into a 1-year lease agreement because they'd like to keep it rented through their redemption period, and it's easier to rent it for a year than it is to rent it for 2 months or for 6 months.
Yes, and on the other side...
So previous legislation protected the renter in that way.
And the other side of the coin is that it allows the renter to not have to get out quickly with 1 month or 2 months, but they can finish the lease, which they knew they had that time period set.
And all of this, we're going to assume the landlord has disclosed to the tenant, as he must, that there's the danger of foreclosure at this house. Yeah. Okay. So they're altering the current laws that are actually set to sunset at the end of 2014.
So what do you think of this?
You know what? I don't care. I think either way is good. I think that they overprotected the tenant in the legislation they passed in 2010, saying that the mortgagee and everybody has to honor the lease, even if it goes beyond the redemption period. I kind of feel like if a house has been foreclosed and a new owner takes over at a certain date, then probably the landlord shouldn't be able to extend a lease beyond the amount of time he owns the house.
Yes. The idea that a landlord would have the ability to obligate someone into something that goes beyond
his ownership,
further their ownership rights. Yeah, I would agree. That in and of itself, I have no problem with. But there's so much more here that as you peel away these levels at the onion, there gets to be some issues. The next section deals with the rights that a tenant has of a foreclosed property. And here's what they're saying. They said when a new owner takes ownership of a rental property as a result of a foreclosure. So in other words, what we're talking about is the home has a renter in it. The home goes into foreclosure. It is foreclosed, and that person who purchased it.
A new person purchased it.
Well, I'm not even there yet.
Oh, gosh, sorry.
And the person who had owned it is now removed.
Gotcha.
They're no longer the owner. The mortgage company, the lender, now sells it, through the sale process, and you have a new owner. It says that new owner, must understand the following. Number one, the tenant that's already in there is deemed by operation of law to become the tenant of the new owner as well. Now, first of all, I don't know that that's necessary because that's what the law states.
That's what the law's always stated.
Even before this whole real estate bubble bursting, it has always been the case that if I bought a property and there was a renter in there, any lease of 12 months or less must be honored by the new owner in the sale of a property.
That's right. This current sunsetted legislation only affected the bank.
Yes.
Because in the old days, the bank didn't have to honor a lease at all. They could, but the new owner has always had to honor an existing lease.
So here we have legislation that does what? Absolutely nothing that wasn't already stated. And so it's unnecessary from that standpoint alone, okay? And it says that the terms and conditions will be transferred to the new owner.
And recorded in a new lease. Mm-hmm. Why is that necessary?
Well,
if the owner has to honor the existing lease, why do they have to record a new one? I'm just throwing that in there.
Well, this is where it gets interesting, is because we have a protectionist attitude with the writer of this bill.
Okay.
That wants to make sure that the renter is not being gouged, and so they're making some assumptions. So they say that when the new owner shall maintain as a rental property the property that was used as a rental by the previous landlord, offer renewal leases to the tenants of the foreclosed property, and offer a fair market rent. What? Wasn't there a fair market rent when the person already went in?
Yes, because he was willing to pay that.
That's right.
He was willing to pay that rent. That makes it a fair market rent.
But according to this, it is stating that there can be, looks like, a change in the rent that the person was paying. There's a lot more to talk about, folks. We got to take a break. Don't go away. More of Where You Live with Gene and Tony after this.